Liz. So welcome everybody to where does Power BI fit in your data architecture. First I just want to say thanks to everyone for taking some time out of your what I'm sure is a busy day and joining us. Hopefully that poll result was good. Hopefully everyone will leave with some new insights on Power BI and hopefully where you can fit it into your particular infrastructures no matter where you happen to be in your data architecture. So first, I'm Brad Gall. I'm a business intelligence consultant here with Pragmatic Works. A little bit more about me. I love working here at Pragmatic Works. We have great people. Love the consulting atmosphere and getting out with clients and engaging with them. I've been working with SQL and SharePoint and BI professionally for over 10 years now. I like to speak at user groups and webinars like this when I get a chance. But you can see I have two little kids there on the side, so whenever they give me a chance to, I do. But we reside in Cincinnati, Ohio right now. Go Reds. Unfortunately, we're having a down year, but at least we get the All-Star game here coming up in a couple weeks. So let's jump into what our topic here is at hand. So we want to talk about Power BI and how you guys can use it in your data architectures. So for our agenda, we're going to start with what exactly is Power BI and give some definition to that, because when I go to client sites, even some that have used Power Pivot and Power View, there's still some confusion on what all makes up Power BI and what the pieces are and what some of the restrictions and things like that are. From there, once we've defined it, we'll talk about where does it fit in your data architecture. So we'll look at some use cases and talk about self-service BI versus enterprise data warehouse and the differences between those and how the two mesh together. Then we'll talk about what infrastructure is required for Power BI. So once we've talked about what it is and how you can use it, how exactly do you get it in-house and start using it and start playing with it. And we'll follow up with some questions. So I don't have a lot of demos for this presentation. I usually prefer to have more demos, but we have a lot of material and we'll be pretty slide heavy for this. So we'll start with, I mentioned that I do find that there is some confusion around Power BI, and I think a lot of it comes down to the marketing confusion that has arisen from the evolution from Power BI. So really Power BI started about in 2010 when Power Pivot came out, and it started out as different products as Power Pivot and Power View were introduced, and then a couple years ago the concept of Power BI was introduced over the top of those. So there's some people that still get confusion of Power Pivot and Power View and how do these things mix together, and then now we bring them all together as Power BI and we have these Power BI sites. What are all these pieces and how do they fit together? And that's what hopefully we'll talk about and clear up in this presentation. Some of the confusion also comes from, it's good to note that Power BI is changing very fast. So most of the products have a 1 month development life cycle on them. So every month you may see a change in the product and a new release to go download, which is awesome. They're taking consumers' feedback and making those changes, but it can be difficult to keep up with all the change sometimes and keep everything straight of what the capabilities are of the tool. And then a third thing that leads to some confusion is Power BI is a self-service BI tool, and that can be a relatively new concept to a lot of companies. Some companies haven't really dug into that or haven't put that into their business processes yet and figured out how to build that relationship between the analysts and IT and really how that self-service BI concept can fit into their shop. So quickly, just a brief history on Power BI because it kind of explains where we are today and how it's evolved to that. Is Power Pivot came out as an Excel add-in, was released with SQL 2008 R2. So it was a data modeling tool and kind of an analysis services junior that came out for Excel 2010 with the release of 2008 R2. Power View came out with Excel 2008, so that's when we added some self-service type reporting. So Power View is a great visualization tool still now, and it was released as it was first released as a SharePoint and a SQL only product, but with the release of Excel 2013 they added it as an add-in to Excel. So Power Pivot and Power View, both Excel add-ins, came out separate from each other. Then we added Power Query and Power Map closely together in 2013. Both were released as just free Excel add-ins along the same lines as for the Power BI, for the self-service BI. Then in 2013, the marketing term Power BI first hit us. So Power BI is an umbrella term that they released as a marketing to encapsulate all of the Power Map, Power Query, Power View, and Power Pivot. All the different powers got put together into this Power BI concept. And really they launched that because they released an Office 365 site where you could upload these different pieces and have them to share and collaborate with them. So we were introduced with a Power BI for Office 365. It was a cloud offering, and it required SharePoint Online. And that is really the environment that we're in right now. Last year, they also added to that by releasing a Power BI mobile app. So there's some iPhone, iPad, Windows Phone applications that can connect to our Office 365 sites and read our Power BI content. Now, it's important to note, too, that there is a new release that's been out in preview since December of last year. So it's a new Power BI site. It may be coming this year. Everyone can go out and take a look at it. And then it changes the landscape quite a bit, where we have a new tool, a Power BI Designer tool, that we'll use to create our content. It takes away the dependency on Excel, and they've built a new site around that, too. So let's talk about the Power BI overview a little bit more, talk about all those different products we saw in that history. So these are all the different pieces that currently make up what Power BI is. So I mentioned Power Pivot. These are all Excel add-ins. As you can see in my screenshot there, we have a Power Pivot add-in and we have Power Query. Power Pivot was the first tool that came out. It is a modeling tool and a data gathering tool. So we can connect to different sources and bring them all together in Excel, and it runs off of an analysis services engine. Power View is another part of Power BI. That's the visualization tool. It allows you to create ad hoc reporting and dashboards and things like that. And then Power Query is what we use to go and gather our data, and it provides some transformation capabilities. So we get some extraction and some ETL. So we get some extraction, transformation, and loading. So with Power Query, we can go pull in separate data sources, merge them together, transfer them, and load them into our Excel worksheets. Then Power Map is a tool that kind of complements Power View. It's a visualization tool more for telling stories and creating videos. If you open it up and play with it, you'll see you create some scenes and you can build stories out of your data and have charts that migrate over a globe and really tell a story mostly for presentation capabilities. And then the Power BI mobile app complements all of those, as it can read those different tools and present them into a mobile platform off of our Office 365 site. Now again, I mentioned that Power BI is evolving, and really what it's evolving into from all those different products is it's evolving into Microsoft's cloud-based self-service BI offering. So they released in preview a Power BI Designer, no Excel reliance on that one now, and also a new Power BI site that's not going to require SharePoint for Office 365 anymore. So really it's evolved from these different add-ins, and as it's gained traction, they're now moving more into a standalone product with no requirements on those other products that will be a cloud-based offering. So it's important to note that this will be a cloud site only, and as of now, at least, there's no integration with like an on-site SharePoint implementation. I also mentioned Power BI is a self-service business intelligence scenario. So what exactly do we mean by self-service BI? Self-service is really, it's a tool for empowering your end users with reporting analysis tools. So that's the main goal of Power BI, is to get your end users the ability to do some reporting and analysis on their own. So to accomplish that, these tools are very point-and-click friendly interfaces. Most of the things you can do without having to write any code at all. Everything can be done in a GUI interface. There are some query things that you need to do, but the query languages tend to have a much shorter learning curve than a lot of our enterprise BI applications. So DAX compared to MDX was written to simulate more of a Excel function syntax, and it was meant to be written so that analysts would be able to use the language better than what we had with MDX. And all of that equates to hopefully less dependency on IT to get access to the data. So the goal with Power BI and the goal of self-service BI is really to empower your users to get them access to your data, no matter what your data architecture happens to be right now. So even if you don't have an enterprise data warehouse, maybe some of your users are powerful enough that they know their departmental data enough and they want to get access to it. These are some tools that you can utilize to get them access to that quicker without having to wait on IT to build the reports for them. And on the flip side, if you do have an enterprise data warehouse, they can also use it to get access to that enterprise data warehouse that you spent so much money on and invested so much time into, and now you need to get it out to your people. Power BI is a great tool for that. So I did just want to show off the tools in case some people haven't seen them a lot yet. I didn't want to spend a lot of time here because we're mostly talking about a higher level of how it fits into your organizations, but just to show a visualization of what the tools are, I mentioned they're Excel add-ins. So I look up here in my Excel Office ribbon bar, I have a Power Query ribbon and I have a Power Pivot tab as well. So Power Query, again, is the tool that we'll use to pull in data from other sources. So if I look over here on the left, I have get external data. There's all kinds of sources that we can pull from. So we can pull from our SQL servers and our analysis services databases if we have those. We can pull from Azure if you're starting to already get into cloud, or if you started there with your infrastructure and you have some Azure SQL databases, you can connect to those, or even some big data with Azure HD Insight. All kinds of sources we can use to pull data in. Once that data is pulled in, we can manipulate it with Power Pivot. So in our Power Pivot ribbon here, we have a Manage button which will open our data modeling interface. I'm working off of a blank Excel file, so you're not going to see a whole lot here, but within this interface we can build relationships and build calculations and aggregations and things off that data once it's been pulled together. And then finally, the other two Power BI applications that I mentioned are Power View and Power Map. And they're up here under our Insert ribbon. You'll see once you've added those add-ins that we have Power View and we have Power Map. So once we have that data pulled into either a Power Pivot model, or we can connect Power View directly to an analysis services database as well, we can report off of those and use those visualization tools that Power BI provides us. And once we've built that stuff in Power or in Excel, we can then save them up into a Power BI for Office 365 site, and this is what that would look like. So once you've created that Excel file, you can save it in here, save it up to a document library. This is built off of a SharePoint interface, so if you're familiar with SharePoint, you have the concept of document libraries. You just save your Excel files into the Power BI document library, and it presents them in this way, and this is where you get the collaboration. So if you have some analysts who are creating some great content and they want to share it with people without having to email files back and forth and things like that, Microsoft provides this Office 365 interface where we can save those files. People can come in and favorite them, so you have the ellipsis button, and I could favorite this guy and it would show up in my favorite bar. They can also, admins can also add reports as featured reports. So if there's a report that gets quite a bit of an audience and something you want to have stand out, you can have it show up in the featured reports bar here at the top. Now if you're not into cloud yet and you are using SharePoint, I have an example of a SharePoint site as well. So this is a Power Pivot gallery. This is a special document library that can be deployed onto your SharePoint 2013 farm. And once you've done all the set up all of the service applications and have the SQL instance and all of that running, we get this Power Pivot gallery where we can deploy our Power Pivot models. Once they're deployed, we can use Excel services to connect to and create dashboards and reports off of those. This is what they look like once they've been deployed. And then on top of that, you'll see we have this Power View button here. And we can click the Power View button and create some Power View reports similar to this right within our SharePoint interface. So with the SharePoint on-premises, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but really you just have those two options. The Power Query and the Power Map are not something that you're able to deploy into a SharePoint site, at least not with the current versions that are available. I won't wait for that to spin up, but so that's just a quick look at what we're talking about when we're talking about all these different products. Last, I did also want to show the new interface. So everything we looked at there was in Excel and with SharePoint interfaces. With the newest release, let's close out of that. There is the Power BI Designer. You see it's in preview. You can go download it for free right now. It's in public preview though, so you can use it however you'd like. And this, as I mentioned, takes out Excel out of the equation and creates a whole new product that is integrating all those different pieces into it. So it's important to note that it's not just an Excel shell with those same add-ins. They've actually gone and they're rewriting some of these products. And they switch things up to where we start with a query, then we can report off that query. As we're using the query, which is the equivalent of Power Query, it pulls it into our model for us, and then we're able to build relationships right within that. If I click on Report, it's a little bit hard to see here, but you can see if you're familiar with Power View and you've used it at all, you'll notice that some of these reports are new. So they're adding additional functionality to reporting, which is the equivalent of Power View in our current BI space, our current Power BI space. And we have some funnel charts. We have some new map-looking things. We have a gauge, a radial gauge. And they split out our slicers and made them into a report type as well. So again, this is the new interface. This is where we're going. It's probably where you're going to look into Power BI. If you're brand new to Power BI and haven't used it yet, you probably would want to take a strong look at this, going with this route, with it probably launching here sometime in the near future. But that is just a quick demo of what these products are. We're talking about where they are in Excel or the Power BI Designer and the sites that they're going to deploy to. We're going to talk more about that as we go through these slides now and jump into our next section, which is where does Power BI fit into your data architecture? So first, to gather our thoughts all around your different data architectures and have a visual. This is a visual of the data lifecycle optimization. It comes from a white paper that Pragmatic Works just released recently, and it's a great visualization for our discussion to talk about where you are and how Power BI can be used in these different scenarios. So if we look at this gauge and we start at the left-hand side and move our way over, we have architecture and configuration and availability and continuity. Those are when you're just starting out and getting the foundation of our data architecture. So we have our SQL servers, and we're just defining our data and then making sure we have good backups and DR and HA, and we haven't moved into optimization and really trying to build out our reporting specifically for our users. We're still building our base. Now, as we move over to the right, we move into, we start performance tuning, and we move into enterprise BI. So this is where we're building our enterprise data warehouses. You can see down there at the bottom that we are starting to use our SSIS and our SSAS and SSRS, our SharePoint, Power BI is mentioned there too. But then we keep moving to the right and we move into big data and our machine learning analytics and things like that. And so the reason I bring this up is everyone on this call should fall somewhere onto this gauge. All of your data architecture should be somewhere on this data lifecycle. And the key thing to note is that wherever you are, you should be able to use Power BI somewhere to help you move along this data lifecycle and to complement the other tools you're building along this data lifecycle. So if we're still on the left-hand side and we haven't really implemented Enterprise BI, we can use Power BI maybe to kickstart that and get some analytics over our data before we've been able to build an enterprise data warehouse. And then once we have an enterprise data warehouse and we start moving and maturing our data, we're going to be able to use Power BI to connect to that enterprise data and get that data access to our end users. Now I mentioned SQL Server and the SSIS, SSAS, and SSRS. One thing I honestly found confusing at first when I was learning Power BI and digging into it, and I think it's a confusion among our customers sometimes too, especially if you haven't dug into, you're new into data warehousing and BI as a concept in general. You know about SSIS and SSAS, and you realize that Power Query and Power Pivot, these things overlap quite a bit. The functionality, a lot of the functionality is similar between these different products. So with Power Query, we're pulling in data and we're doing some transforms and extractions from different data sources. That's exactly what SSIS does at the SQL Server level. Same with Power Pivot. Power Pivot was really written off of the X-Velocity engine, the same that the SSAS tabular model is written off of. So they're really even using the same model, and all of the functionality of Power Pivot is available in analysis services. And finally, with Power View, we have the tried and true SSRS for writing our own pixel perfect reports, and we have Power View we have Power View now coming out with Power BI, and how do those two things play together? And really what we're talking about when we compare those two things is we're talking about self-service BI versus an enterprise data warehouse. How do those two things mesh together, and do they replace each other? And that's where the waters get a little bit muddy, but what's great is basically you have a lot of options here to start getting into data warehouse, and you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater with the self-service BI products either. Self-service BI can complement the enterprise data warehouse and be utilized to stop some gaps while you're building an enterprise data warehouse. So on that topic, I do want to point out that Power BI is not a replacement for an enterprise data warehouse. In some of the use cases we'll mention, we can do, and I even already mentioned it, we can do some reporting off of departmental data. So connect directly to a SQL database, it's an OLTP database, and try and get some analytics out of that. I don't say that to say that it's a replacement for an enterprise data warehouse, and now that Power BI has come out, we can scrap that idea and not have to go that route as we mature our data. And some of the reasons for that are listed here below. Sheer scale. So Power BI is written as a desktop design interface. We have some server for collaboration, but we really don't have that server scale to handle those millions or billions of rows as we start to try and analyze 3, 4, 5 years of data and get trends over time. Another thing that an enterprise data warehouse provides us is centralized reporting in a single source of truth. So with Power BI, with its self-service concepts or its focus, it's really meant to get out to our analysts and have them be able to get their data. So you're going to have multiple departments, hopefully, using Power BI and creating some models and getting data to their users. But with that, you don't have that centralized bringing together of data, and so you don't have maybe one department has one customer list and another department has another customer list, and it suits them fine for their analysis. But when you want to bring all that together at an enterprise level, you don't have that single source of truth of a customer list to do your reporting across that. Along those same lines, comes with that is data integrity. Some things you get with the enterprise data warehouse is you define your business rules as you're pulling those in. So enterprise-wide, you can define what the business rules are, how you calculate things, and define some definition of what some metrics are, where there might be some disparity as departments do their own analysis. We can bring in master data and have master data tables, again back to that customer scenario where two departments may have different customer lists. With an enterprise data warehouse, we can build a master customer list that everyone can then start using going forward. And data quality. So we can build some data quality checks and have some data stewards to check to make sure that we're not duplicating POs in our system or things like that from a reporting perspective. And then finally, from a development aspect, we gain better source control. And since the tools are SQL Server and you're using SQL data tools, you have that development processes built in where our developers are putting things in source control and following development life cycles, where that is not meant to happen in Power BI. It's meant to be a quick turnaround, a quick life cycle for users to get to. Now what Power BI is it's a great complement to an enterprise data warehouse. So it's a powerful analyst-friendly reporting is one of the main great things about Power BI. I mentioned it's point and click, so it was written to have analysts be able to do some of their own ad hoc reporting. And then in addition to that, we can do some data mashup with our enterprise data warehouse. So we can connect Power BI to an enterprise data warehouse that already exists and wrangle some data together if that's what needs to happen at the department level. And we can do that in a much quicker fashion than if in your data architecture you already have an enterprise data warehouse, and you may realize it can take months sometimes to really formalize getting in this data and getting the resources to be able to build all these different data sources that people want to add into the data warehouse. Well, while the development lifecycle is going on, your analyst can do some quick data mashup and maybe just get some rough numbers and find out really if they even need this analysis going forward before you spend all that money and time developing the enterprise data warehouse with it. So we'll take a look at some use cases now. When we consider use cases, we need to think a little bit about who is using the tools and where you are in your data lifecycle. So what data architectures do you already have in place? And for who's using those, you have use cases for both developers and analysts. So I think for developers, there's definitely good use cases, and your development teams really should understand Power BI and be able to use it and work with your end users to use it. For the most part, development, if you're starting to develop your life cycle and get into an enterprise BI solution, they're going to be more focused, however, on the SQL products. They're going to be building an analysis services, databases, and using SSIS to really pull in and have that enterprise level ETL transform and build an enterprise data warehouse. That being said, there's some use cases where they can complement those processes in that development lifecycle with Power BI, and also do some stopgaps, and if they learn it, they can present it with analysts, and that can be a way to ramp up your analysts in your workforce to be able to start using Power BI. So if they're asking for a particular report and you have a developer build that out in Power BI and Power View and show it to them, and they get that quicker life cycle than having to wait on the enterprise data warehouse. As they're showing them that, your analysts will start learning Power BI and start playing with it, and hopefully can transition to start doing some of that on their own. And then some obvious use cases for developers. Developers are not going to be getting into the SQL Server software as much. They're going to be completely focused on Power BI a lot more, and they're going to be using it to do some of their own analysis and to be able to connect to the data warehouses and pull in that data and get that themselves. Again, hopefully with a quicker life cycle and hopefully with less reliance on your IT. The one thing I did want to point out with the analyst use cases when we get to them, I have talked to some people, and it's a legitimate fear of giving out too much power to the analysts is that if you've been in IT for a while and you may know about access databases, and you end up with these rogue access databases that are out of source control and departments relying on them, and that is a fear that could happen with these. But the way you are able to you should be able to leverage Power BI still is to keep those open lines of communications with the analysts and the IT. And even though they're doing a lot of this ad hoc analysis and bringing that data in, we as an IT organization and developers need to kind of keep a finger on the pulse of our analysts and see what they're doing. And as things are growing and becoming more of a backbone of some of the reporting within these departments, look at pulling those into a full-scale development lifecycle and pulling those in. But the great thing about them having that power and using a lot of these tools that integrate with each other or are similar to each other, the discovery process should be much easier for those types of things. So your analysts have already done a lot of the discovery process and really put it into a product for you that you can understand of here's what we need. This is the type of data that we want to have and the type of reporting that we want to see off of it. So let's talk about those use cases. So first developer use case, if you are in your data lifecycle and you're still on that left-hand side, but you're interested in Power BI and you've started or you're interested in enterprise data warehouse and you've started a data warehouse project. One thing you can do with Power BI is use it for some quick turnaround on proof of concepts. So the development lifecycle on Power BI is much shorter than writing out ETL packages and master data and doing data conform dimensions and following a Kimball model. We can instead do some proof of concepts and pull some data together and maybe quickly find out, hey, these two data sources are not meshing up together very well, and get that kind of fleshed out early on within your data warehouse design process. Because these tools are pretty quick to do, but you get a output from them, you can mock up reports with end users and solidify those business requirements before you get too far down your enterprise development lifecycle and get things in front of your users before you've spent months and time working on those. So another developer use case is one-time reporting. So your manager comes and they need an answer to a question now. It's not necessarily something that they need to analyze over time or that they need that they know at least right now that they're going to need to continue using going forward. But it is a report you need to turn out, and we can use Power BI again because of its quick turnaround to create some of those reporting tools. So from an IT perspective, maybe even your IT professionals could use this. A lot of times things like database sizes. How has my databases grown? I need to buy a new SAN. We're running out of space. I want to project out my space correctly. We can utilize Power BI to go grab that data off of our SQL servers and spit out some reports that maybe not something that you're going to need again for 2 or 3 years, that you don't want to build an entire ETL process around, but that you do need a report off of somewhat, and then they can take that to take those visuals to management and build their case. Developer use case 3 could be enterprise data warehouse reporting. So if we are in our data lifecycle and we already have an enterprise data warehouse out there, and we've built some SSRS reports, and we have an enterprise data warehouse portal that we're putting specific dashboards and KPIs and things like that on. You're still going to have some analysis, and once you've built that, everything doesn't go away. You still have a lot of reporting needs that people want off of that enterprise data warehouse. If anything, it makes people more hungry for their data and they want more reports. And maybe if you haven't built up your business analyst force yet with the training they need, they haven't gotten into the reporting tools yet. Well, your developers could use the Power BI visualizations and things, the Power BI visualizations, create some reports off of your enterprise data warehouse. We saw that they connect to a lot of sources, big data and SQL analysis services. We can create those reports and hand them over to our analysts and get those reports out the door quicker. Maybe not as pixel perfect or as enterprise ready as for our portal, but getting the departments what they need. And again, hopefully by doing that and using those tools that the analysts are able to use, because once you've given them that Power View report, they can edit it and play with it and interact with it. It's all written to be ad hoc. They can learn those tools and start to work off that reporting themselves. So developer case number 4, if we already have a enterprise data warehouse, and you'll find once you get an enterprise data warehouse out there, along with people wanting reports off of that, a lot of times what happens is they want some new data integrated into that. So the report they want maybe doesn't have all the information in the data warehouse that they need. So they've gotten some new data source in-house, or they have an idea of, for instance, so if you have a sales, you're doing sales and maybe they want to analyze, hey, how's the weather affecting this? And they've found they can go get some weather information or some new demographic data out of from some sales data. They come to you and they say, I really want this, and they haven't gotten into Power BI enough to do it themselves. You as a developer could connect to your existing data warehouse and test out those new sources before spending a lot of time with the development, and then also be able to get something in their hands quickly. We can mock up the reports and solidify the business requirements and really find out once they get that if they want to continue with that integration, if it really is something that should have the time spent to pull into an enterprise data warehouse. And one more use case, again, this isn't exhaustive use cases for Power BI, but another one is if you have gone into the big data and you're moving into machine learning and you have some Azure data set up. Azure has something called Azure Data Stream, and Power BI can be set up as a report tool for that for real-time stream data. So you can set up a data stream off of your applications or maybe your Internet of Things if you have lots of test sensors and things like that, and you can have real-time dashboards, report off of those, and Power BI is the tool you can use to do that reporting. Some use cases for the analyst, and some of these will overlap a little bit with our development as you ramp up your analyst workforce maybe and get them the training and the knowledge they need to dig into these. But if you do have, one use case I've seen is you have some analysts that are pretty technical and they feel like they have the knowledge they need to be able to get to understand the data they have. They've really been in that department for a long time. They understand some of the tables and things underneath. They can use Power BI to do some of their own reporting maybe before you have an enterprise data warehouse that they're able to do some analysis against. So they can quickly create some ad hoc reports from their department data. If in this use case, they can hopefully do it with little IT resources. So this is when you have some analysts that are just saying, I just want to get access to my data and they need some tools. I may not know T-SQL, but I understand data structures and relationships, and how can I get my data and create some reports and just look at what my data is doing. That can be a use case for Power BI. One thing is it does require the knowledge of the data structures, so you're not going to be able to hand this over to just any analyst who doesn't have the knowledge to be able to navigate your OLTP system. That's where the enterprise data warehouse comes in, where you can flatten that data and make it much easier to understand, but this would be an analyst that has a lot of that internal knowledge. Use case number 2 is overlaps with one for the development, but for a developer, but it's reporting against our enterprise data warehouse. So one of the most important things if you build an enterprise data warehouse is getting the data out to your people. So one of the things, it's become less of a scenario now, I believe, but it was more of an issue years back where data warehousing would become a huge IT project, and people would build this big IT enterprise data warehouse and get everything conformed and really focused on the data side and the IT side of things. But if you don't get that data out and give your users a way to get into that data, then it can fail the project. So Power BI is a great tool for once you've built the data warehouse to get the data to your end users, and it's very visually friendly, and the tools are friendly enough for the end users can be able to learn it and create those reports themselves. As we saw with those collaboration sites, so since they've integrated SharePoint into Power BI via the cloud or somewhat with the SharePoint on premises, it gives those users the ability to share those reports with little IT resources too. So once they've built something in Excel, they're able to publish it and have multiple people see it. And then the last case I have is Power BI integrate data with the enterprise data warehouse. So once your analysts have some power and knowledge and they've gotten familiar with Power BI, and maybe they're able to use some of those, some Power Query integration and some Power Pivot modeling, some of your Power analysts will be able to quickly mash up some data and do some ad hoc analysis. So they can wrangle some different data. And again, this would be a stopgap for new data sources or just data sources that haven't made it onto your enterprise data warehouse list yet, for them to be able to go and match those up together. Hopefully once they're trained up, again, it can be with little IT department interaction as far as them being able to produce it. And then the overall story hopefully is you have these power users, you're in close communication and contact with them and collaborate with them. And as some of these data integrations they do with the enterprise data warehouse data that's already there becomes popular and something that they really rely on, you've got some data discovery that you can then go and pull into your enterprise data warehouse. So we're going to talk about infrastructure and what you need to actually use Power BI. If any of those use cases sound like something that would be useful within your data architecture. And it gets a little disjointed with the products as they are now. There's an on-premises or cloud. Everything is migrating to the cloud, but as we stand now, certain parts, specifically Power Pivot and Power View, are able to be used within a completely on-premises infrastructure. So Power Pivot, for instance, if you want to start utilizing Power Pivot, if you're on-premises, it's an Excel add-in. If you're in the cloud, it's also the Excel add-in. So if you have Excel 2013, all you have to do is go and enable the add-in. You can start developing Power Pivot models. When you want to collaborate with those, if you're on premises, you would need a SharePoint farm with Power Pivot installed. It would require SharePoint Enterprise and either a SQL BI or an enterprise license. There's a fair amount of configuration that goes into that SharePoint farm to get Power Pivot up and running, and then you'd be able to deploy those Power Pivot models onto your SharePoint site and have some collaboration over those. With the cloud, it's an Excel add-in, and you can simply deploy it to the Power BI for Office 365 site, and all that setup's kind of handled for you if you're either thinking about going to the cloud or if you've already gone to the cloud. Power View is similar infrastructure story. The only difference for on-premises, you don't use Excel to develop the Power Views. As I mentioned, when Power View first came out, it was actually a SharePoint/SQL product. Then they added it to Excel. With the SharePoint on-premises story, it's you develop the Power Views off of a Power View model or off of an analysis services connection that's in your SharePoint site. So you do that within the web browser on your SharePoint site. And again, you deploy it to your SharePoint. You'll need the Power Pivot, SharePoint Enterprise, and SQL BI or Enterprise. With the cloud, it's an Excel add-in again, and you can deploy to your Power BI for Office 365. So if you're able to get a Power BI license in an Office 365 environment, you can just develop the Power View sheet within Excel and then deploy it to your Power BI site to collaborate with it. Power Query is where we diverge off of the on-site. There are some third-party tools that can allow you to get Power Query working on-site and have it refreshable without having to just email or share out Excel sheets. But for the cloud, from Microsoft's perspective, it's a Excel add-in. You can write your Power Queries there, and you can deploy them to the Power BI for Office 365 site for collaboration. Same story for Power Map. So it's an Excel add-in, and you can deploy those to Power BI for Office 365. And then Power BI Mobile is a cloud-only component of Power BI also. For the development, it's really just taking those add-ins that you developed, so those Power View sheets you've developed within Excel. Once you've deployed them to Power BI, your Power BI mobile applications can connect to that cloud site and view those within the application. Now, I keep mentioning there's a future of Power BI because there's some pretty significant change with Power BI coming out most likely this year. The development would shift from Excel to the Power BI Designer, and you'll notice I don't have any on-premises options there either. That the new future Power BI is going to be cloud only. So if you haven't started into Power BI yet, hopefully you're able to leverage or at least look into some cloud capabilities and be able to use Power BI in that way. We develop those in the Power BI Designer, and then we would deploy those Designer files out to the new Power BI site. This doesn't really fall under our Power BI discussion, but something I did want to point out. Datazen was recently purchased by Microsoft. It is a reporting tool. It's I kind of look at it as a cross between SSRS and Power BI. The big gap it fills is it is an on-premises reporting tool. So the big gap it fills is it was designed to be a mobile application, so it has mobile apps for Android, Windows, iOS, and you can have an on-premises mobile story with Datazen. So Datazen was purchased by Microsoft. If you have a SQL Enterprise license, you can get it for free and download it. On-premises, you just need a Datazen server, and the publisher application is where you do the development. And then for collaboration, you save the files that you build with the Datazen into a Datazen server. I put SharePoint there because you can then save, or you can display the reports in SharePoint. There's not a real tight integration story there at the moment, but that is possible by doing like an iframe or something like that. So next steps. I just want to put some links here. If you're new to Power BI again, which it looked like some of you were from the poll question, if you want to design or download the Power BI Designer preview, they have it for free out there on the Microsoft site. You can also sign up for a free preview of the Power BI site. So not only can you just play with the designer, you can deploy them out to the site. And in our talk today, I talked more at a high level of where these things fit in your organization, but I didn't dig into how you use the tools. And we have a lot of that for free on our free webinars on Pragmatic Works. If you don't know, you can go and sign up for a login and do a search on past webinars, and there's a lot out there already on how to use Power Pivot, and I believe there's already one out there on Power BI Designer, and there's even some out there for particular industries. I know we just had one recently about how to do analytics with healthcare, and it touched on using Power BI with healthcare if that happens to be your industry. So that's what I had for our presentation today, and I'm just going to hand it over to Liz. If we have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yes, we do have a lot of questions, so we will try to get to all of them. But if we don't, I will send them over to Brad and see if he can answer those at a later time. Okay, someone wants to know if Power BI only exists for users with Office 365.
So yes and no. So with a Power Pivot and Power View, if you want to collaborate with them, you don't have to have Office 365. You can have SharePoint with them. With the Power Query and Power Map, as it stands now, you have to have Office 365. With that new preview coming out, I don't believe you'll have to have Office 365. You'll just have to have the Power BI license because they've separated it out into its own site.
Okay. With the changing shift Microsoft is having towards self-service BI, where does that put enterprise BI tools such as traditional governed BI?
I believe that they really are going to complement each other. The self-service BI is a complement to your enterprise data warehouse. It's to help empower users to get the data they need, but it's not going to be able to replace that scale and the one source of truth and the conformity that you gain from an enterprise data warehouse. So I don't see, and Microsoft's not really targeting self-service BI to replace their server products. Those will still have a use in your data architecture as you're growing and gaining just more data. The Power BI will need those other SQL Server tools, those enterprise tools, to be able to gather that data and conform it and store it correctly for you to be able to do the analysis off of it.
Someone wants to know if they're only running on Excel 2010, can they only use Power Pivot?
Yes. I believe Power View is only Excel 2013 or above. Power Pivot, I'd have to, it's been a while since I looked at the Excel 2010. I can follow up on that one about the other products, but I'm pretty sure it's just Power Pivot.
Okay. Can Power BI reports be defined, then made into shareable items via a SharePoint site?
Can you say the first, is it Power, what was the question again?
Can Power BI reports be defined and then made into a shareable item via a SharePoint site?
So yes, Power View report, so the reporting component of Power BI is Power View, and those can be defined. The story's a little different between on-premises and cloud, but the Power View reports you actually design in SharePoint and collaborate with them there. So you would just design, it's the same design interface between Excel and SharePoint. You just do them in SharePoint, and then you've defined it and shared it out there. If you are able to use Office 365, then when you build that Power View sheet within Excel, you deploy it to Office 365, and you're able to share that as a report or a dashboard there.
Okay. Do you perceive that Power BI will be replacing Excel completely in regards to business intelligence functionality?
It's difficult to tell because so in the newest release, it definitely has no reliance on Excel at the moment. That they're pulling all the different pieces, Power Query and Power Pivot, over into Power BI Designer. They're not just, it's not just a thin client over Excel, so they're rewriting those, and you can see differences there where they've mashed up Power Query and Power Pivot together. So that is going to be a standalone product. It's pretty obvious. It's hard to tell what they'll do with Excel because those add-ins are there, and lots and lots and lots of people are using them there, and they're not going to just get rid of them. So I imagine there'll be some kind of two-sided approach where the add-ins will still be available in Excel, but I don't really have any information on that specifically, though.
Okay. With the new Power BI site, will it be possible to do an on-prem solution, or is it not known yet, or is that still going to be SharePoint Enterprise 2013?
With the new Power BI site, as it stands right now, it's only cloud. And they removed the reliance on SharePoint, but they don't have an on-premises version of it yet. I don't know if they will. They've been pushing the cloud-first approach quite a bit. I know they are releasing a new version of SharePoint 2016, I believe, but I haven't seen what type of, I don't know if they know yet what they're going to do with the new Power BI site and how it integrates with that.
Okay. Can you tie the results of Power Query directly into Power Pivot?
Yes, absolutely. So, and again, I believe there's one of our old past webinars might have some of this in it. But when you pull in the data with Power Query, there's an option to say, just add this directly to my model, and it'll pull it directly into your Power Pivot model. And actually what the new Power BI Designer does is it does that automatically when you pull in, say, 3 tables from a SQL source using Power Query. It just automatically puts them into a Power Pivot model behind the scenes, and you can just define relationships on those.
Do you know if Power BI and Office 365 is going away with the emergence of PowerBI.com?
Yes, actually I didn't show that site, but yes, it most likely is that old site is going away. And when you hit, you'll notice when you hit your Power BI for Office 365 site, they're introducing Power BI dashboards preview, and if you click and learn more and things like that, they say that they're going to help you transition what you have existing in Office 365 into the new Power BI dashboard. So that tells me they're probably going to go away with the old Power BI sites and move fully over to the new PowerBI.com.
Okay. Power View cannot be exported to different formats like SSRS, correct?
Correct. There's no export to Excel function. You can export them to PowerPoint, so you can create PowerPoint slides out of them, but not directly to like Excel tables.
Okay. Can you use Power BI tools with Office 365 Excel?
Yes. So there might be a licensing restriction. You have to. I think you might have to have a certain level of Office 365 product. Like I think some of the smaller, like maybe small business ones, may or may not have it. But I believe most of them, if you have Office 365 Office, they're able to use the Power BI pieces.
How can Power BI be used for a quick turnaround for a POC for a DW? Is there some information on this?
Um, I can look into that. I don't have any information directly on that. It's something maybe we could, Pragmatic Works could talk to you about. It's more of it's pretty in-depth question about beginning to end, but basically what you can do is you can use Power BI, Power Query to connect to your data sources you have now, pull them into a Power Pivot model, try and write views on top of those tables if you're pulling out a SQL to try and mimic a star schema and kind of get a proof of concept of that. And then you have Power View right there to do some reports to see how that data is looking. So for proof of concept, it's kind of you utilize Power BI to build a data structure that simulates what an enterprise data warehouse star schema would look like, with the idea in mind that it's just a proof of concept, and then you're going to build the tables in an actual relational database.
Someone wants to know how Power BI is licensed.
Power BI is licensed through, if you connect to powerbi.com, it's in transition. So right now, if you have cloud licensing for Office 365, and let me sign out of this. It's an additional license per user. You could buy a cloud license for your users to be able to use the Power BI site. With the new site coming out, they've cut the price down on that quite a bit, and you don't have to have the SharePoint for Office 365 license with it. You can just buy a Power BI license. That's in transition right now, though, so I don't know all the specifics of when that is officially happening if you haven't started using it yet, but if you hit the Power BI site, here we go, they have some pricing information out here and talking about what you get for free, and then this price is a much lower price point than is what was or currently is for the old Power BI site.
Where does Power BI store the data it uses?
So Power BI, it stores the data in a model within, so for the Excel version with the add-ins, it stores the data in a model file compressed within that Excel file. So Power Pivot is really an analysis services engine running within Excel, and one of the things that Xvelocity engine does really well is it compresses it. So when you go and query data out and pull it into Power Pivot, it's actually storing it within that Excel file. And with the new Power BI, the same thing is happening. It's just doing it within the, I think they call them PIBX files, but it is pulling the data into the file that's in the designer. Thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of compression around that, so even though you're pulling in 10 gigs of data, it can compress it down quite a bit, like down to a gig or even a lot less than that sometimes.
Someone wants to know how Azure fits in with Power BI.
With Azure, you don't have to have Azure infrastructure as a service, or really Power BI is a software as a service cloud implementation. So it doesn't fall under the marketing of Azure, but it is a software as a service application within the Azure ecosystem, you can kind of say. If you do have, it plays really well with Azure databases. So if you're looking at using Azure databases and you deploy a Power BI connected to an Azure database, which is one of the connections you can use, you can have automatic refreshes in the cloud between those two services so that the data refreshes automatically there. Same with your HD Insight. If you're using Azure HD Insight, you can connect Power BI and have things refresh right in the cloud.
Unfortunately, we only have time for maybe one more question, and I know there's a lot more, so I'll make sure I get those to Brad. Are there any financial institutions using Power BI right now curious about leveraging cloud services such as these, given the sensitive data these companies contain?
I haven't personally worked with some, but I know we do have financial services clients that we have, and yes, there are some using Power BI. They're using Office 365. What you need to do to make sure you're staying in compliance with everything is to talk to your Microsoft reps or consultants about whether or not you're meeting all of your Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever requirements you have for your data to keep it safe. What Microsoft does is they try and keep everything under compliance, and they put out not white papers, but their validation statements basically saying, for instance, also with healthcare, that yes, these particular products are HIPAA compliant, and then you can use that hopefully for your validation.
Well, we are out of time for today, so like I said, I know we have a lot more questions, so we'll make sure to get those to Brad and see if he can answer those for us. If you guys need anything in between now and then, please email us. You can email Brad at bgall@pragmaticworks.com. You can email me, Liz. It's tied to your GoToWebinar account, so it's lhamilton@pragmaticworks.com. As always, we do record these sessions, so they will be available on our website by the end of the week. We thank you all for attending, and we hope to talk to you all soon. Thanks, Brad.
Yep, thanks everyone.